Hello, you guys. Welcome to Life Discussions with Dr. Jefferson. This show is kind of impromptu, so I'm kind of going off the cuff. But then again, I kind of go off the cuff quite a bit. That's kind of like my thing. It's more natural than not for me. Sorry. Just turning off my ringer. Um, but yeah. So, how are you guys? Hopefully, you guys are faring well and everything is well in your world or whatever. I just so happened to be looking at a couple of headliners, a couple of things that were sent across the email um, in numbers. And it struck me that there is a certain disappointment with our culture. You know, we sometimes as women, I feel, have some really unrealistic expectations of our men. And the content that I'm going to show you guys today, the stories that we're going to cover today, are going to be quite sensitive. And before we get started, of course, you guys know that I got to play my intro and everything with all of the disclosures. Big shout out to the chat. Thank you guys for being here. But just before we jump into this, let me go ahead and play these disclosures, and that way we're protected from copyright infringement and all of those legal things that come with being impromptu and not prepared, because I'm impromptu, but I'm never not prepared. All right. So I'll see you guys back in about 3 minutes. guys, welcome back. If you guys can hear the music in the background, I apologize if it's a bit loud because I'm jamming in here, but I'm turning it down, not a lot, but I am. So today's show is going to be about a domestic violence incident that ended the life of a young woman. And it's kind of close, near and dear to me because I have stressed so many times on this channel, around accountability when it comes to our military veterans and active members of our military. The need to get the help when you know that you need help, when you see signs of incongruence with your behaviors, your personality, things that affect the way that you receive the world around you, especially when you're trying to acclimate or reacclimate yourself to the civilian sector of things. But so I'm not happy to talk about this, but I am happy to promote awareness around the topic and to talk about some of the things that we see in our everyday journey as we're passing through, and some of the things that we do that actually perpetuate the cycle of abuse and us ignoring it or turning a blind eye versus us actually offering viable solutions and alleviating some of the distresses that happen in relationships as a result of these couples not having adequate support from family systems, other systems that they're connected to, where we should be noticing the red flags. So before I show you guys that part, I want to jump into this story because I feel like this is I guess a good way to kind of start off things and kind of highlight where we're going, right, with the story. So let me go up here. Of course, not these bikinis. Who knows this guy's face? So many women think this dude is so sexy, and I'm just trying to figure out what it is that you guys are seeing. Just not giving me sexy man vibes. But women tend to go for the bad boy. So that's kind of like a natural inclination, especially women in the Black culture. But you know what? I'm going to be honest. It's women in every culture. The bad boys stand out. It's something about them, their aura. I don't know. It's something about the bad boys that stand out. And the interesting thing to me is that historically, if we go all the way back to the days of the Vikings, men have shown us that they're more interested in war than they are women. They have a natural inclination. Think about it. What's the role of a man? How do you guys see the role of a man in general? Just the natural, what we're expecting. There is nothing like great coffee. Morning, noon, night. If we think about it, the role of a man is supposed to be one as the protector and provider. In order for him to be a protector, a man naturally has to have an intrinsic inclination to be violent. Now, follow me. Where I'm going with this, it's going to be a very interesting place, but it's going to be an interesting, even more interesting journey as we navigate, what's necessary for us to get there. Okay. So if a man has a natural inclination to be violent, to be an aggressor as a means to meet his job. Hey, Miss Sandy, how are you? If that's his natural inclination, right? He's naturally going to be hostile, violent, aggressive, has to be seen as threatening. How many different personalities are we really expecting men to have? Right? We say we want them to be a protector. We want them to be a provider. In order for them to do those two things, it requires a high level of aggressive behavior. So, if a man is not molded properly to be able to turn off that aggressive side of him prior to him being very much invested in and exposing his true nature of self to his family, right? The same people that he's responsible for protecting and providing for, that kind of spills over, right? So the more men are engaged in their regular hostile behaviors amongst one another, war, if you will, the more violent their nature becomes. That's kind of what I see. So then we go back and we have all these conversations. Man, she made that coffee strong. Gotta love. Shout out to Jasmine, you guys. She's amazing. So if we dial it back and we're looking at the innate nature of a man, being that he's a protector and a provider, and those things require a certain level of hostility, certain level of violence, aggressive behavior. If we just looked at that, when is he supposed to turn that switch off to be something different? Right? Because then he would have to worry about code switching and switching the switch on and off in moments where he's with his family, and now he's required to be violent. I just don't know. When I started to theorize and think about it, it just seems like it's unrealistic to expect these men, especially with so little emotional resources for processing, because of the way culture shapes them. We expect them to be truly compassionate, gentle with us. So Miss Sandy says, isn't that a problem for the women since it's women doing the raising? It's a combination, actually. I think that if men are raised more in a women-led society, they don't have as much of a violent edge because women cannot curate or cultivate that necessary aggression into a male. So there is only a certain extent that a woman can do, right? Everything else has to be modeling behavior. So this would be family of origin, the men in the family of origin. So grandfathers, fathers, uncles, cousins, older brothers, all of these people are responsible to contributing to the intrapsyche of the male as to how it is his masculinity must be presented amongst society for the sake and the provisions of his family. Those basic things, basic constructs. Now, when women start to get caught in the crossfires nowadays, when children start to get caught in the crossfires nowadays, we want to have a different conversation. We want to blame people. We want to have the blame game because we play the blame game, we avoid accountability. Back in the day, however, nobody played the blame game. These men were engaged in hostile acts of war on and off of their home field at all types of times. So when these men would go away and fight at war, you have other men that they are at war with, right? Who are knowing that these men are away from home, and they come and they invade that sacred space of that man's home where his wife and his children are, and he would rape the wife, daughters, and murder the boys and all of them, hang them and burn them, so that the man could come home. If he ends up winning this war, he will not have won the larger war, right? He would still be a failure. So we come from a society of those types of men. Those are the first men. These are considered to be the forefathers of men. And yet, we expect a certain softness and compassion out of men. I don't know. Sometimes I'm baffled by what society shows us and what we continue to expect out of people that we have seen, not only historically, but leading up to now. The world has evolved, so they may not be signing up to go and fight in a war, right? But it's a war in these streets. So many people say it. Because I think the real war is a war of morality, the war of ethics, a war of ethos of a man. So I think that that's the war that they're really fighting, right? And with a lack of spirituality to ground these men, to provide that softness that I spoke of, that women expect for men to have, society as a culture expect for men to have for their women. If society now minimally expects this softness, human behavior instead of animalistic type of behavior, right? If the vast majority of society start to support the chaos in men, the aggression in men, what we see are stories like this one, right? And this is where it starts. Okay? This is where it starts, you guys. So, Lil Boosie, who is from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Torrance Hatch. This is the interesting part of the story, you guys, okay? I'm going to scroll on up. He was arrested this weekend. Or last weekend. On the October 11th, and charged with second-degree criminal damage to property, inciting a riot, disorderly conduct, and criminal trespassing. Okay? Now, I gave you guys kind of like the background of what men typically were expected to do, how they were behaving, right? And what was acceptable. But now we live in a society where we say that these behaviors of men are not acceptable, and the laws of the land prevent men from operating in that capacity. However, we still expect that part of a man's innate aggressive nature to be shaped and molded to respond and react with aggression. So how do they keep that aggression supercharged? I find that there are two ways that this is happening. I find that it's happening through things like this, acts like this, here in Atlanta. They let him sign a signature bond to get out of jail. But before he went, this is the interesting part. I'm going to come on down here to this part. This is the important part to me. Let's see if I can make this bigger. Okay, there we go. So so you guys can see everything again. So here's what Torrance does. Before he even engages in the act that got him arrested, right? In that violent act that got him arrested. You see what he was offering a reward for? Is everybody reading that? Let me highlight it for you. So at some point, someone gave him the information, and that person was supposed to be working this particular show. And what is he going to do? He's going to react. Miss Andy says, so the mother takes no blame. Should she? Miss Andy, type to me what blame you feel is appropriate. Says men aren't supposed to be soft. Okay. That's interesting. So if we think that men are not supposed to be soft, right? Because this was just the beginning. I want you guys to look at this. This is the first thing that I think that men are doing to make sure they're molding, shaping, and cultivating the necessary aggression that they need. So now let's jump into this other one. Megan Santiago. Do you guys know who she is? Does anybody know who Megan is? Probably not. This is what I want you to take light of. Notice that this is a Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So when I see things like this happen amidst, and we're going to read this story. We're going to read this story in depth, but here are the details to who she was. A beautiful young woman, wife, mom to be. Make this bigger so you guys can see it. Okay. So a young woman in her 30s, married, ready to live her best life, right? With her knight in shining armor. He's honorably serving his country. Seems like an ideal guy to pick, right? Hope y'all reading it. This is the part that broke my heart. I'm not sure it's there. On the 27th, I think it was, of September. It happened this year, at the beginning of this month. About 10 days or so ago is when they found her. So Megan, she was 32 weeks pregnant. Her husband is Sergeant First Class Joseph Santiago. And she reached out to a Facebook friend, person that knew her since she was like 11 or 12 or something. And this person, Miss Badowski, told the news that when she reached out to her, she didn't think that was awkward for her to reach out on Facebook, because at this point they thought that maybe Miss Santiago didn't even have her own cell phone. Once she moved to on-post housing with her new husband and all that good stuff, I think they had 4 kids. But once she took on that life, they never saw her really again. He isolated her from all of her family. And I'm not going to lie, the military life can be very isolating. He moved to Germany. We typically will take our families with us unless they say, hey, I know I want to stay here on post. They can stay where they want to stay. They don't have to go with us, right? But when he was stationed in Germany, he took them and moved them to Germany. So, of course, that could be very isolating. She didn't have any or very minimal contact with her family of origin, even her mother. Um, so, we're talking about this is several years, over the course of several years. And on the 27th of September or so, she reached out to this childhood friend and she asks her to take her in to help her escape from her relationship. She's in a violent relationship, okay? 32 weeks pregnant. 32 weeks pregnant. Her children were in the house on the day that this woman, not even a week later, suffered a fatal head injury that not only left her brain dead with severe trauma, right? If it led to them forcefully being, in the position where they had to deliver the baby early, okay, and place the other kids in foster care. Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Miss Sandy says, why didn't she call the police? Well, military families, we call the MPs. And I think that's a really good question to ask. So, if he's in the military and the military police are also military and they're all one big family, because we are, not only that can this be isolating, but it could be debilitating. So, even though there is not a lot, and the military refuses to comment because that's how we do, we keep things in house, which is the reason she didn't call the MPs. And if she called the regular police for that authority, you got to realize that they're going to say this outside of their jurisdiction and they can't handle it. They would refer it back to the MPs. And it's a circular pattern, just to let you know what it looks like. So, for this young lady to have died, and she died in her on post housing, okay? For this lady to have died in the way that she did after reaching out for help at the onset of the month that is signifying domestic violence awareness is terrible. It's terrible. And to die at the hands of a soldier who is more responsible than anybody, of protecting the citizens of this country, which his wife were one of them. He killed her and his children were in the home. 3 other kids. I think the oldest kid was like 11 years old, you guys. Like, okay, so it was September 24th when she reached out on Facebook. September 27th is the day that he did this. So the witness says that she talked to her and let her know she was in an abusive relationship with her husband and asked her to assist in getting her out. And the woman was like, yeah, and she was ready to go right then at the moment, but she was waiting for October 7th because he had orders to go on a training October 7th. So it seemed like an ideal time for her to leave with her kids, you know? So, of course, the article continues to read how the military isn't giving out much information. Fort Campbell is not going to do that because it's just not how we operate. But then again, I always say that women are the most vulnerable population of soldiers. And we are. We are. I can't tell you how many known instances that I've seen the military cover up. And this is just you guys are just getting a blink of what it looks like inside of that culture. So when I say, why are we so upset about men doing the same thing that they have taught us historically they are going to continue to do? Why do we continue to have unrealistic expectations out of these men? Are we delusional? We do continue to show up. You know, we continue to show up, and I don't understand it. I just, you know. So the best thing that I can think of is when we think of what it is that men owe their society, we can hold them accountable for owing society protections and provisions and their very hard work, um, even chivalry. We could go as far as to say that. But historically, both on these streets, in these streets, we've seen men, especially our young black men, put our young black women in harm's way more often than not. There was another story that I watched on Facebook Watch, where a young lady told her story of her being a mom of three. They had three small children, one of them being an infant in the back seat. And a man stepped out in the neighborhood in Chicago where they lived, stepped out of the alleyway next to their apartment, because they had parked in the alleyway to get out and unload the groceries and things like that. And the man stepped out and stood up tall and just started firing into their vehicle. I think she said her husband, boyfriend, was shot maybe 9 times, but he unloaded a full clip onto them. The young lady was shot in her buttocks, private area, as she was jumping in the back seat to protect her kids. And she was shot in the face, chin. And she happened to survive. Her neighbors rushed to the scene to help pull them out of the car, help pull the kids out of the car. And the young lady didn't even realize that she was shot. This is a couple of years back. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my God. It took this young woman, a person who was in the hospital for like 14 days, multiple surgeries, fighting for her life. It took her to get out of the hospital and make flyers on her own to finally get someone to speak up as to who the shooter was. Police were canvassing the neighborhood and doing everything that they could to find the guy in the aftermath, because the guy, of course, took her boyfriend's life, right? But this woman, more than just wanting this man to be held accountable and brought to justice, she wanted to know why. She was really fixated on the why her family was targeted, because this is what I say when I say that we are delusional. I started this off by saying that women innately were drawn to the bad boy, right? And we'll say that we're fed up. There are events that have happened in our life that they tell us we should no longer be invested in these same types of guys, same types of behaviors, because we see that it could turn out very bad for us. But for some reason, we continue to cycle back in and continue to go back to those same types of men. It's a different guy, but it's the same guy, one and the same. So then you're kind of forced to ask the question, are women just insane? Right? They see that these men, even if underneath it all, the man really means them no harm, right? They see that these men cannot protect them because of their innate nature. We see that this is something this man is not capable of doing. Because what I want to say is this: there are a lot of different men out there. But the question is, how does it make it more difficult for those men who are out here that are thriving in life and doing things, earning an honest living, but they're overshadowed by the abundance of bad boys out there who are the representative sample of these populations of men simply because it's more of them, right? And these women are constantly being hurt. So even if that bad boy cleans his life up and it looks good, nice and shiny, this guy who killed Megan, he was a fucking sergeant first class. That's almost the highest rank in the enlisted population, you guys. He only had 2 more ranks to climb to be the best or widest recognized. He was an E7 and he murdered his wife, traumatized his children, almost murdered the child inside of her, and forced his kids into foster care. So, why do women continue to show up if they are truly fed up? Why do you guys think it is? What do you think it is? We see all of the red flags, so we can see the red flags like the story I showed you with Boosie, right? Torrance is his real name, being arrested for the violent act that he committed here last weekend or so, whatever, here in Atlanta. We see that. We see here the story that's on repeat on all news outlets, right? But we only see a fraction of what's happening with men murdering their partners. I've covered a lot of them on this show, and it's still not even an indentation on the larger number of men murdering women and children, the ones that they father children to. Yeah, we see that. So why are women continuing to show up? What do you guys think it is? Why are we shocked when men are only showing us what they have historically done forever, and we continue to invest our time, our energy, our chastity in them? And we still do it to this day. So let me go to the comments. Let me see what you guys are saying. Okay, so Tammy, we were just basically talking about the pattern of behavior of men, the history of males' behavior, and kind of where that aggression comes from and how it's necessary to a certain extent based off of, those basic things that we say that men are supposed to be responsible for providing to women. When we talk about a man having been responsible historically for the protection of women and providing for women, you got to understand that comes with a certain level of violence, right? And so violence calls for aggression, aggressive acts. And we see those aggressive acts. We see the red flags that these men are aggressive and very hostile in the way that they communicate when they become upset. We can see they're loose cannons, right? But there is something inside of us that says that we can be the change that we'd like to see in this man. And so we continue to put all of our eggs in that basket, right? In that basket. One day will be nothing because it succumbs to the pressures of that man being just a man, being overwhelmed, not having the adequate tools for him to deal with his distress, right? Not being able to resolve conflict in a meaningful, purpose driven way that says that he's also in that moment to keep what it is that he has reputation, family, admiration of the woman that he loves, his children, whatever, right? He doesn't behave in that way. He behaves in his reptilian way of presentation, which is aggressive, hostile, defensive, all of that stuff. And so when we see that this continuum of violence goes the full course and it ends up with the woman dead or woman and children dead, right? We as a nation of people, we're like, how could he do that? How could he do that? That's the first thing we yell out. How could a person kill a tender, innocent child? Men have been killing children forever. They have. Back in the days of the Vikings, who talked about that, in times of war, which is pretty much all the time. While the man was away at war, the opponent would sneak up, rape and murder the man's daughters and wife, and murder the boys, hang them all, and burn them all. Historically, this is what we've evolved from. So, women say, where is the humanity? I think we're looking for an evolution of men to happen that it's happened on the surface, but it's not happened on the inside of these men. And our requiring them to continue to be protectors, providers, because these two, just the man being a protector and a provider requires a tremendous amount of hostility and violence, right? If we're requesting that from the man and we're not offering that softer side of things, the bridge to behaviors, if you will, adequate coping mechanisms for when they become distressed and find that they're getting overwhelmed, we're not giving them what they need, right? We're not giving them the adequate support from all systems. So family of origin systems, environmental and societal systems, the systems that are responsible for holding men accountable when they fail to meet the constructs and the requirements of society and culture. So because we do not have these particular systems in a place where their existence, right? I think that we are unrealistic as women when we continue to expect these men to give us something that historically they've been proven to not give us: a softer side, respect, heavy layers of regard, a softness, if you will, nurturing and compassionate way of being with us. What's the most exciting way that men engage in sex, even? Tammy says, we are not all one big family. Wives are the most neglected. Women in general. So not just wives in the military. So in the military lifestyle, women in general are the most vulnerable population of people because there is still the system of the military's organizational structure still has a huge grudge against having to reshape so many policies and regulatory guidelines around the inclusion of women. And so it's a larger problem, you know what I mean? And I've been to that table several different times. And even though so many of these women think that we're gaining some level of segue by having these other provisions introduced in the system that says that the women need this extra time off for maternity leave and extra time to adjust to be able to pass a PT test after having a baby. All of these things that these young women are now reaping the benefits of. There have been a lot of fuss, if you will, around that because what you're saying, and I just feel like it has to do with understanding of the system. These young women are more entitled and they feel they're more direct and they're I don't know. They are just insistent on getting these things that they feel like are their rights, right? And I'm okay with it. But here's the reality. Many of us are veteran women who have served in our military honorably, and we have not only met but exceeded those expectations that are the same as the ones for men in the same weight class. So I just sometimes am baffled because I think that this is one of the things that makes men continue to perpetuate those cycles in military culture that doesn't provide adequate protections for women on a deeper level. Like you can change the rules on the surface, but that's not changing the way we operate on the inside at the core of the organization. And society is the same way. Society happens to look at women and children and continue to be very neglectful for the basic and intrinsic needs of women and children when it comes to their provisions and protections. Even our police officers are becoming more aggressive with women. And so I sat back before reviewing this and I was looking at Megan's story. I was looking at the other young lady's story because the other young lady was giving her story verbatim from her own lips. Of course, Megan can't do that because she's now deceased. And I was just sitting there with all of it and I was just like, well, why do women continue to show up the way that they do? Regardless of the outcomes that men continue to show us, right? Why do women continue to show up for these men? Why do we continue to push for these men? And the only thing that I could think of is that just like men are intrinsically created in a way that they are hostile, aggressive, violent, etc., women are created in a way that we are naturally and intrinsically compassionate, passionate about our purpose, passionate about our children, passionate about creating safe spaces and a future for our kids and our husbands and being an element of peace for them. So I think that that's the answer. However, I see a tremendous amount of women who are fighting for a certain level of equality to and from men. So we want to be equal to a man. We want the same things that a man is entitled to. We want to be recognized as equally important, have a voice as loud as that of the man. We want to be sitting in spaces where the man is meant to sit. We want to sit in the king's throne. Right? Like, why not? Why is it that he's given all of this glory and jewels and all of this stuff and we can't get some of that, right? That's what women in today's society, modern day women, want. Hey, Black Anonymous, how are you? So when they show us that they are going to continue to be as aggressive, as hostile, as easily triggered, right? The reason that we can't find ourselves getting out or escaping from these situations is because we're the one that is offering the peace, the balance, the stability. Our compassion naturally has those women who don't have a modern day framework inside of them. Traditionally raised women will naturally put their man's needs above those needs of their own and of their children. Hands down. And that is how Megan ended up dead. Miss Sandy says she contacted her friend, but not the MPs. That makes no sense. Sounds like it's more to the story than we are hearing. Oh, I'm sure. Lots more. Like, what exactly is it that you're expecting her to get from the MPs? He's the member of the military, not her. Right, Tammy? Well, that was her escape plan. So she was supposed to leave with the friend, because her family and friends are all distant from her. He's stationed in Kentucky. She has no family, no friends, nobody she knows. So when contacting the friend that she knew from childhood that lives, states away, the plan was for, you know, them to drive up and get her while he was away on this order the first day on the 7th of October. And the 7th of October never came because days later he killed her. So Miss Sandy says, I disagree. Women are the most protected. Okay, Miss Sandy, elaborate. Tell me, to what extent do you think women are the most protected? And are we talking about in the historically, where, you know, men would go and seize vulnerable households, rape the women, kill the women and children, that thing? Or are we talking about currently um, women in society in general in vulnerable neighborhoods? Said, so whose fault is it that women picks the wrong man? Do you think it's the wrong man though? That's a good question. So the type of man or woman, if you will, that a person picks, right? Do you think that you can ever select the wrong suitor? Everything that you know, and I don't know what you guys' belief systems are and things like that. Personally, I'm a spiritualist. I believe heavily in the law of attraction and those innate qualities of spirituality and closeness, connectivity, destined connections, and things like that. So, I know that many Christian people feel like there is like a pre-written script, right? God has ordained a certain path. Very similarly, people who are spiritualists believe that there are paths that are already ordained and scripted. And essentially, our job, right, our purpose as human beings in that journey is to find ourselves enlightened by way of our curiosity as to what our purpose is in each independent exposure, experience, and opportunity that we're given. So, what are your thoughts about that? Because I feel like Miss Andy brings up a really valid point here. Do you feel like people are truly responsible for the people who they come in contact with, the people that they invite into their energy centers on a grand scale? Oh no, Tammy, I'm not surprised. Not at all. So Tammy says you attract who you are. I mean, Miss Sandy. Sorry. Huh. That's an interesting perspective. That's an interesting perspective. So, the law of attraction actually would teach us quite the opposite. Opposites attract more so than the same. You don't attract the exact same energy that you are. Oftentimes in those relationships, you see more hostility than you do compatibility, because compatibility is about making, completing, creating space for the growth of um, opposites, or even not, even if it's not completely opposite, but not the exact same. You have to be able to add to a person's value, an entity's value. If you think about your job, right? If you apply for a job, they're not going to hire their competition. Why do that? They're going to hire someone whose value systems, for the most part, align with theirs, not are the same, but align with theirs to increase their capacity for growth as a company. Your interpersonal relationships that are intimate partner and, matter, nature, those are pretty much the same. So it says, I don't think you can help who is in your environment, but you can help who you allow in, so to speak. I love it. So you are right on it. So you hit the nail right on the head. That's what I meant by determining your purpose at each given opportunity or an experience. So you're going to cross paths with people that you're meant to cross paths with over the course of this life's, span. Some people are not meant to go the full course of the journey with you in your becoming, because life essentially is about becoming the element that you're supposed to be, living in your purpose, if you will. But in order for us to continue to be seated in and living in our purpose, we must have a driving force that's motivating the greater parts of us into its full on cultivation so that we can reach our capacity. So you don't control the people, the energies that come into your life, but you are 100% in controlling the lessons that you learn from the experiences and exposures that you are rendered over the course of your lifespan. And that, in and of itself, shapes the way that you move in these various relationships where you're tethered to someone in one way or the other. So if you meet somebody and you force a relationship of intimate partner companionship out of that situation, everything that you can think of that could possibly go wrong could possibly happen in that relationship, because that is not what has been ordained or scripted for you to have. And at some point, you guys not only overstepped the boundaries, but also overstayed your course in someone's life. So, you got to think about it on a greater level. So, Miss Sandy says, since I took accountability for the people I let into my life, I haven't had a problem since. It works if you think with your brain and not what's between your legs. That's interesting. So what about situations where there is no sex between these people, or rapes and things like that? Do you think that you have control over allowing those people into your life? Or is that something larger than you or smaller than you? Says, for example, I had a friend warn me about someone being a thief. That person never got a chance to steal from me. Women get warned and they still jump into the fire. Okay, so we did talk about that, and a woman's need to repair, fix, you know, others. We talked about that need, and that's quite interesting. So, I that makes me ask another question. Do you guys feel like the content of a person's previous character, based off of their previous actions or interactions in life, dictate who they are in their present, or who their capacity has a tendency to yield at some point? That's the larger question there. Because here's the thing, right? I don't know how many of you have really thought about it, but I sat with the fact that there are criminal background checks that are run for people. And these people are the same people who end up arrested later on, because I saw additional stories, as you know, when they sent me the articles that we reviewed today. But there were additional, articles. New Mexico right now currently has arrested a mother and son of murder for murder, because they combined, I don't know how it happened, but they murdered his daughter. I think his daughter was maybe 5 years old, four, maybe 4 or 5, I don't know. And the girl had burns on her back, and I think multiple lacerations and blunt force trauma. Nobody knows, but the father said that she slipped in the bathtub and that she burned herself on the stove, and they just never got medical attention for her. So they arrested him, and then they arrested his mother. Now, in that case, very similar to what Miss Sandy is stating, the young lady who had, I think, 3 or 4 kids with him had contacted police and the courts to not only petition for custody of all of her kids, but also to exclude him from access to the children, and filed for a protection order. And the system failed her. And this young daughter of hers and his ended up dead by his hands or his mother's hands. But now their children are in foster care, and I'm sure eventually she'll get her kids. But it makes me just wonder, you know, it really does. It just makes me wonder, like, in some instances, you cannot control a person's access to you, but you can control their impact on your life, right? And even if you find yourself getting out of the situation where they can be a detriment to your health, physical safety, emotional safety, whatever, um, what's going to happen is going to happen. The question you have to ask yourself is, am I going to be there for that? Right? When these things happen, are they going to affect me directly or my children directly? Or am I going to advocate for a greater role in this whole thing? And then as a result of my advocacy and my actions, protect my system from having to go through these things. But the question still remains, why, right? If a man cannot provide protection and provisions for a woman and her children, then why are we constantly still investing in that same situation? So Miss Sandy says, you have control over everyone that comes into your life. Women would take a position as a side chick and think he won't have a side chick when he wife you up. Side chicks ignore all that red flag. Oh, that's interesting. So you did answer my question about the rape. If you're controlling all of the people that come into your life, that means that You're going out to take out the trash, and that serial raper comes by and you become his next victim. Are you controlling that? Right? Or you're sitting in your house, just finished, showering, about to bed down for the night, and that serial rapist breaks in and he rapes you and beats you to a bloody pulp. Did you control his access to you coming into your life? Because he's still in your life, right? At work, wrapping up, closing, broad daylight, go out to your car where it's parked behind the location. Per policy, are you still controlling that person's access to you? Okay. So, what do you think about the scenario with the rapist? And I'm curious, what are you guys? What are your other people that are watching the live? Like, what are your thoughts when it comes to our the amount of control that we actually have versus what we tell ourselves? Because I'm gonna be honest, right? There is a thing when we're doing motivational interviewing and a lot of these therapeutic techniques, and they encourage self-talk, positive affirmations, and what these things convert to, if we're just calling a thing, are tiny little lies. We tell ourselves these itty bitty lies, right? So that we can eventually reseat ourselves, or so they say, speak things into existence. Now, we do that therapeutically so that we can start working on these things as goals and objectives, building objectives that help us reach the goal. But when we do these things, because human beings have a natural inclination to do these things in their everyday life in general, they just don't really know they're doing it when they're doing it. Very similar to Miss Sandy right now. Is she delusional by thinking that she really controls every single person's access to her? Some people may think so. But we are controlled by our neural center. So if we think, like, if our brain is really and truly responsible for sparking actions, putting things into play, housing our belief systems, and as a result of housing our belief systems, being responsible for the way that we move because we believe in a certain way, right? If we truly believe in this way, our actions will help to bring us a step closer or three steps closer to actually acquiring the desired outcome that we want based off of the said belief system. So, but what are you guys thinking? Oh, rapes. Says most rapes don't happen like that. It's usually someone you know. And men get raped and murdered more than women in this country. That's also why women are the most protected. Well, I don't know. I've provided therapy for a lot of serial rapists. And what I notice is most of those people, they don't stalk the people that they know, because essentially, if they know, yeah, you got a higher propensity of getting caught. Right? So I talk about the most dangerous people are the people who have not yet gotten caught. So we talked about that whole background check, right? That's why I feel like background checks are inadequate to a certain degree, because we're looking for red flags, because red flags will tell us that the person has had a sketchy history or done some things that we, you know, now as a result of knowing these things, refuse to invest in that person, right? What does it really do for us though? Because how do we know that person still's doing the same things that got them caught and punished? If we think about it, we talk about Insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. So the most intelligent people are the people who do a thing, and as a result of getting caught, they no longer invest in doing that thing. They no longer do that thing. And because they are smarter than their previous version of themselves, because they're properly aligned when it comes to who they're supposed to be competing with in this grand scheme of life, right? If that's the type of person that we're dealing with, we're not going to see anything on a criminal history report. You're going to run a background check and it's going to be squeaky clean, because every person that they've ever stolen from, every person they've ever murdered, every crime they've ever committed never went down on the books. They never became a criminal because they're quite the best at what they're doing. But hey, we have criminal background checks and lots of people use them. So I guess they tell you something. They tell you the areas where a person isn't as smart as we'd hope they'd be. That's how I feel about them, right? But they don't tell us about the person that is so intelligent that they've not gotten caught before. Only the therapist sees those, right? And because we're seeing them and the crime has already been committed, doctor-patient confidentiality. So we're not telling anybody that they're the person that did the thing and never got caught. So I don't know. Well, what stats are you looking at? I look at the crime stats of, reported violent offenses and sex crimes against women and children and things like that, where that are reported in psychotherapy, but people that have not been arrested. That's kind of what I look at. I look at what the studies show me, what we're using to help alleviate the symptom presentation, the urges, and things like that as a result of them finding themselves in therapy, trying to navigate the underlying cause of said behavior. So you're right. We probably aren't looking at the same statistics because you're looking at the ones who get caught. So, yeah. Yeah. So, but even with the prison population, it's a ton of rapes that happen inside of the prison population. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. People who become these serial rapists, though, they don't get caught for a reason. Okay. And I'll say that. But, I feel like women continue to show up because there is an innate need to be a man's piece, to be the balance, to be the fixer, if you will, of women, because it's kind of what historically women have always been for men. And that there is an innate urge to fulfill that destiny, regardless of how modern the woman is and feminist movement, yay, that woman is. There is an intrinsic need to level, if you will, the man and his masculinity that may be presenting as toxic, his violence, even if the violence is directed towards the woman, and to give a man what it is that you think will help stabilize him. So like children. However, I think that the more the violence persists in these situations, and the more we see them, and the women eventually become like victims of Stockholm syndrome. So it's almost like they have emotionally been kidnapped by the man because he has all of the textbook behaviors of an abuser, right? Her family talked about, and she talked about the isolation from her families, not giving her space to visit with her family, taking the kids, maybe like all of these things they talked about. And these are textbook indicators of domestic intimate partner violence. But there is something that kept her in that dance. That very violent, very aggressive, victim and abuser cycle kept her right in the dance and eventually cost this young lady her life. And in the other scenario in Mexico, cost the life of the young lady's and the young man's daughter. And I found it to be even more interesting that he had a mother, his mother, who was there. I don't know, you guys. So continue to share your thoughts. If you catch this on the replay, please let me know at this point that you've caught it on the replay and that you're sharing your thoughts. And just let me know what you think about all of this. Tell me what you think about why it is that women are still expecting this certain level of compassion and softness and sensitivity to come from men, and men have historically shown us that that's just kind of not their nature. That's not what they're there for. And when there is not an active war for them to be committed to on a professional level, they're waging wars in the streets. These men are choosing violent and risky occupations, selling drugs, hitting a lick, just so they're still feeding that urge that needs to be aggressive, hostile, violent. And women are continuously attracted to that bad boy, the guy that's into shit, because it's kind of like, he's not boring at all. I personally would rather live my life vicariously through all of you. I kind of don't want to be getting beat on or emotionally insulted on a day-to-day. I don't want to have to draw my own validation from external sources like the internet, people that don't even know me. Right? And it's only false validation in the first place because at the end of the day, they don't know really what we're struggling with in our relationship and the violence that we deal with on a day-to-day. So, in the interest of October being Domestic Violence Month, I want you guys to remember Megan Santiago. She was a 33-year-old mother who died at 32 weeks pregnant with her fourth child at the hands of her husband, who was Army First Sergeant, Sergeant First Class Joseph Santiago. So my heart definitely goes out to her family. This woman, she suffered this fatal blow on September 27th, which was a couple of days before October, which highlights domestic violence awareness. She reached out in her last couple of days before she was killed to a friend and tried to escape the violent pattern and cycle of behavior in which she found herself trapped in with her husband. And this particular situation was textbook domestic violence, intimate partner violent type. And nobody helped this woman in time. If you guys want to learn how to advocate for people who are in domestically violent situations Every single show that I air on this platform has the crisis line included. I've also included the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Please understand, when you see something, it's necessary to say something. The situation with the scenario in Chicago with that young lady, what I want to say is this. It's disheartening to see small children and a baby be subjected to the crime scene that was seen there as their father was killed right next to their mother being gunned down as she sought to protect them. But the question is, how is it that we as Black women are still expecting these Black men to show up for us? And historically, they've just shown us that that's just not what men do. You can't fix a man if he's already broken. Does that mean that we have to divest completely from that hood dude or the bad boys? Maybe. Because sometimes we have to take a stand if we want things to change. We're so willing to go out there and picket, boycott, hold up signs, say Black Lives Matter when the police are killing our young Black men, Black men in general. How many of those Black men are taking a stand and taking a shift actively in their lives to decide to invest in you as women, to protect you, to protect their kids, to get the help they need so they don't abuse you and take their anger and their enraged emotions out on you? How many of them are doing that? At what point does it make sense for us to take a stand for ourselves as women and do the things that we need to do to protect us and to protect our future, our lineage, to reshape this pattern of behavior that has been ingrained in our young men? If you see something, please say something. Help a person that you feel is going through the remnants of and the cycle of abuse in a domestically violent and intimate partner like violent situation. Know the signs. Look for women who find themselves isolated away from family, disconnected from friends, disconnected from people, and reluctant to make new connections with people, who always look to their husband for approval before they give you an answer if you're talking directly to them, whether it's culturally appropriate or not. Look for all of those signs. And if you see these signs, send some help in for that person, because there are so many women suffering in silence because they've fallen in love and they have become infatuated with their abuser because they have now defined that cycle of abuse as an indication of love. That is when it becomes the most dangerous. So then they can't even advocate for themselves. So, do your part. Be a positive influence and a positive impact on the world around you. And I know it's like so much going on right now, but know the red flags, if you will. Miss Sandy made a very good point when she said that she felt like she was in control of the people that she allows in her life, right? Even if that's what you need to tell yourself that, and take control slowly by being more decisive and more curious about who's in your life and who's trying to get in your life and for what purpose. Continue to ask the questions like, why do you think we're connected? Right? What do you think your purpose in my life is? What do I inspire in you? Right? What moves you about me? So that is all that I have to render to you guys. Let me see, I got one more comment over here. Says, it could have been she contributed to it. Most women that contribute to violence in the homes tend to stay. Well, even if She did. Um, the amount of women who stay in an intimate partner violent situation who are a part of the cycle of abuse are about equal to the women who are not a part of that cycle of abuse actively or an active contributing factor. And here's the other part. When a person triggers you, if you are a person who is not a hurt person that is repeating a cycle of abuse that has been conditioned in you, your response is not to harm them. Your response is to divest. So only when we find ourselves matched with a person with that type of energy do we find situations where these types of things happen, just to clarify, right? So, that's all I got, you guys. Make sure that you bookmark your calendars for tomorrow night's show at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tomorrow night, we're going to talk about the prevalence of social media masking the insurmountable amount of need, emotional and mental health need on the internet. So, that's the show topic. I still haven't figured out which relationship advice segment we're going to cover tomorrow. I'm kind of on the fence. I got like 3 that I'm like, because I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, I might need to kind of read these things before we delve into them live on the show, because some of them leave me stumped. So I just don't know. I still don't know which one we're going to cover, but either way, it's going to be a good topic. It's going to be a great show. And I'm going to give you guys some tips if you find that you're going through some of the clinically relevant distresses that we name, or any other level of distress. I'm going to give you some coping strategies that are quite effective in helping people remain balanced, even just for the moment, or bring yourself back to level. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Later days. Bye.
Who alive can't put me in a box. I redefine any definition you got. I am the tiger, I'm making steps to the top. The flames, I rip it up, you just gotta hand me the rock. Take a seat, you cannot stand it. All I know, the flow harder than a Scotch bonnet. Don't try studying me, you cannot manage. This ain't what you want, bitch, I'm a fucking phenomenon. This ain't what you want, bitch, I'm a fucking phenomenon.